The conduit was exactly where I remembered, a tight metal throat behind a false wall. I squeezed in, the world narrowing to the circle of light from my headlamp, the sound of my own breathing loud in the confined space. It was a claustrophobic's nightmare, but the burning cold in my chest was a better compass than any fear. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, I emerged into a silent, humming space. The server room. Racks of blinking lights cast a cool blue glow. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the primary data array and connect the compact high-capacity drive Leo had given me. It didn't steal data. It injected it. It planted a deeply hidden timed release worm that would, in 24 hours, begin systematically altering financial records, creating a digital trail that would lead investigators to a series of offshore accounts Alistair actually used for his more questionable dealings, along with fabricated evidence of massive, systematic fraud. It would make it look like he was not just a thief, but a criminal on an epic scale, embezzling from his own investors. I was framing the framer. I was back in the conduit, the drive secure in my pocket when the lights flickered on. I froze, pressed against the cold metal. A figure stood in the doorway I had just entered. Not a security guard. Alistair. He held a heavy, custom-made pistol pointed directly at me. His tuxedo was immaculate, but his face was a twisted mask of fury and triumph. "I knew your sentimentality would be your undoing, Marianne," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You always loved the drama of a heist. I had motion sensors installed in here after the first investor pulled out. I knew it was you. I've always known it was you." My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. I said nothing, calculating the distance, the angles. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice steady despite the terror. "I'm just balancing the books." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. This is a tantrum. You were always so emotional. It's why you could never play in the big leagues. You built a nice little app, but I built an empire." He took a step closer. "Now give me the drive and I might let you disappear again. This time for good." I knew he was lying. He couldn't let me live, not now. I had seen the monster behind the mask, and monsters cannot abide witnesses. In that suspended second, I saw our entire history flash before my eyes. Not the good times, but the subtle manipulations, the way he'd isolated me from friends, the way he'd always steered conversations about money, the slow, methodical process of making me dependent on his approval. The theft on our anniversary wasn't the beginning. It was the culmination. My hand tightened around the data drive in my pocket. I had one move left, a move born of pure, desperate instinct. "It's too late, Alistair," I whispered. "The data's already been transmitted. It's on a timer. The FBI, they'll have it by morning." It was a bluff. The drive in my pocket was the only copy. But his eyes widened a fraction, the supreme confidence faltering for a single, crucial moment. It was all the opening I needed. I kicked out, my foot connecting hard with a junction box on the server rack next to me. Sparks erupted and the room plunged into emergency red light. In the chaotic strobe, I turned and scrambled back into the conduit. A gunshot roared, deafening in the confined space, the bullet ricocheting off the metal with a terrifying shriek. I didn't look back. I crawled faster than I thought possible, driven by a primal surge of adrenaline, the sound of his enraged shouts echoing behind me. I emerged into the construction site, gasping, my clothes torn, my hands bleeding. I didn't stop. I moved through the night, a shadow among shadows, discarding the tactical gear in a dumpster, emerging onto the street as just another anonymous figure in the rain-slicked city. The next morning, from the safety of a different anonymous room, I watched the news. The fallout was swift and brutal. The data worm had done its work. Headlines screamed about the Sterling X fraud, the billion-dollar deception. Alistair was arrested at his gym, the footage playing on a loop on every financial network. The elegant, powerful man in a tracksuit, being shoved into the back of a federal sedan, his face a pale mask of shock and fury. His empire, built on my stolen dreams, collapsed in a single day. The investors fled, the board dissolved the fund, and the vultures of the legal world began to circle. I felt no euphoria, no triumphant shout. There was only a vast, quiet emptiness, the silence after a long and brutal storm. The money was returned to me in a series of frozen asset transfers, a number in an account that no longer held any meaning. I had won. I had taken from him everything he had taken from me and more. I had exposed the monster and watched him be caged. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the television, the woman who stared back had eyes that were older, harder, haunted by the things she had done in the darkness to reclaim the light. The revenge was complete, a perfect, terrible work of art. And in the profound quiet of its aftermath, I understood that while I had destroyed the man who broke me, I could never quite reassemble the woman I was before he did. Some fractures are too deep to heal without a scar. I turned from the window, the first light of a new day washing over the city I had conquered from the shadows, and began slowly to figure out who was left now that the ghost's work was done. The final stage of my plan required accessing the physical heart of Sterling X, Alistair's private server room, located in a secure sub-basement of his midtown office tower. Digital access was impossible. It was an air-gapped system, physically disconnected from the internet for ultimate security. But I remembered the architectural plans from when we'd first discussed his dream office. I remembered the old, decommissioned maintenance conduit that ran from the basement of the adjacent building, a building currently shrouded in scaffolding and renovation nets. It was a long shot, a physical gamble, but it was the only way. The night of the Sterling X annual gala, an event I had once presided over as hostess, was my window. While Alistair was on stage, basking in the adulation of his guests, I would be in the walls. Dressed in black tactical gear, my face obscured, I moved through the shadows of the neighboring building's construction site, the smell of dust and wet paint thick in the air. The conduit was exactly where I remembered, a tight metal throat behind a false wall. I squeezed in, the world narrowing to the circle of light from my headlamp, the sound of my own breathing loud in the confined space. It was a claustrophobic's nightmare, but the burning cold in my chest was a better compass than any fear. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, I emerged into a silent, humming space. The server room. Racks of blinking lights cast a cool blue glow. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the primary data array and connect the compact high-capacity drive Leo had given me. It didn't steal data. It injected it. It planted a deeply hidden timed release worm that would, in 24 hours, begin systematically altering financial records, creating a digital trail that would lead investigators to a series of offshore accounts Alistair actually used for his more questionable dealings, along with fabricated evidence of massive, systematic fraud. It would make it look like he was not just a thief, but a criminal on an epic scale, embezzling from his own investors. I was framing the framer. I was back in the conduit, the drive secure in my pocket when the lights flickered on. I froze, pressed against the cold metal. A figure stood in the doorway I had just entered. Not a security guard. Alistair. He held a heavy, custom-made pistol pointed directly at me. His tuxedo was immaculate, but his face was a twisted mask of fury and triumph. "I knew your sentimentality would be your undoing, Marianne," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You always loved the drama of a heist. I had motion sensors installed in here after the first investor pulled out. I knew it was you. I've always known it was you." My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. I said nothing, calculating the distance, the angles. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice steady despite the terror. "I'm just balancing the books." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. This is a tantrum. You were always so emotional." My revenge would not be a single, dramatic explosion. It would be a slow, systemic poison. I would become a ghost in his machine, introducing friction where there was once smooth operation, sowing seeds of doubt in the fertile ground of his investors' greed, creating tiny, inexplicable failures that would accumulate like rust on a blade, until the whole gleaming structure crumbled in his hands. The next 6 months were a descent into a shadow world. I lived in the quiet, anonymous rhythm of Astoria, my existence pared down to its essentials. My old life, with its charity galas and power lunches, felt like a movie I had once watched. My new life was lived in the blue glow of multiple monitors, in encrypted chat rooms, and in the hushed corners of library reading rooms. With Leo's unparalleled skills, we built a digital twin of Sterling X, a mirror world where we could model every transaction, every investment, every communication. I used my intimate knowledge of Alistair's psychology, his arrogance, his need for control, his subtle tells when he was bluffing, against him. Our first move was elegant in its simplicity. Alistair was courting a notoriously cautious Swiss family office for a 9-figure investment. It was his white whale. Leo intercepted their due diligence team's encrypted traffic and subtly altered the data packets, introducing a barely perceptible recurring latency in the financial performance reports of Sterling XS flagship holding. It wasn't enough to be noticed as an attack, just enough to feel like a minor, persistent technical glitch, the kind that hints at unstable or overloaded systems. Then I posed as a freelance journalist and sent the lead analyst an anonymous tip, phrased as an idle question from a confused source, pointing out a tiny, almost insignificant accounting discrepancy in a subsidiary company, a discrepancy we had digitally fabricated. The analyst, already subconsciously primed by the latency to be suspicious, found the discrepancy. It took him 3 weeks of digging, but his final report to the family office recommended a wait-and-see approach, citing potential though unproven data integrity issues. The 9-figure investment vanished. I watched from the shadows as Alistair's smooth facade cracked for the first time. A paparazzi photo caught him leaving a restaurant, his face a mask of controlled fury, a stark contrast to the usual smug composure. It was a small victory, a single drop of acid, but it tasted sweeter than any champagne. I escalated the campaign, moving from defense to a quiet, relentless offense. I knew Alistair's greatest weakness was his belief that everyone had a price, that loyalty was a fiction. I began to exploit the very alliances he had forged. There was a young, hungry fund manager named Chloe, whom Alistair had recently poached from a rival firm with extravagant promises. Using a complex web of proxies, Leo and I created a shell company and reached out to her with an offer to invest a substantial no-questions-asked amount into a personal side project she was secretly developing, a project Alistair had publicly dismissed as a distraction. The offer was too good, too perfectly tailored to her ambitions to refuse. In accepting, she unknowingly gave us a backdoor into her Sterling X email account. We didn't steal information, we planted it. A carefully forged email chain, buried deep in her sent items, suggested she was dissatisfied and being courted by another fund. Alistair, whose paranoia was a finely tuned instrument, found it himself during one of his routine surveillance sweeps of his key employees' communications. He fired her in a spectacular public blow-up, accusing her of disloyalty and destabilizing his entire team. The incident sent a ripple of fear through Sterling X, and the first cracks appeared in its cultured interior. Talented people started getting nervous, looking for exits. I was the unseen architect of his growing isolation, the ghost in the boardroom turning his own manipulative nature against him. The game changed the night I decided to see him in person. It was a reckless move, a need for a tactile hit of confirmation to see the damage up close. He was at a gallery opening in Chelsea, a sleek, white-walled space where the art was as cold and abstract as he had become. I stood in the shadows across the street, the rain misting my hair, watching him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He held a glass of wine, laughing with a city councilman, the picture of effortless power. But I could see the tells now, the subtle signs of strain my campaign had inflicted. The too tight grip on the wineglass, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, not in enjoyment but in assessment, the faint tension around his mouth that his smile couldn't quite erase. He was still magnificent, still the man who had walked into a lecture hall a decade ago and stolen the breath from my lungs, but now I saw the cracks in the marble. As if sensing my gaze, his head turned, and for a heart-stopping second, his eyes seemed to lock directly onto mine across the rainy street. The laughter died on his lips. He couldn't possibly see me, not in the dark, not with the rain-streaked glass between us, but a flicker of something, unease, recognition, a predator sensing a larger predator, passed over his face. He took a half-step forward, squinting. My pulse hammered in my throat, a wild, thrilling fear. I didn't move. I let him look, let the ghost of me unsettle him. After a long moment he turned away, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it, but the ease of the evening was broken for him. I melted back into the darkness, the taste of the rainy air sharp and clean. The hunt was no longer one-sided. He knew on some primal level that he was being hunted. This encounter spurred him into action. A week later my burner phone, a number only Leo had, rang. It wasn't Leo. The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, and laced with a threat so subtle it was more frightening than a shout. "Miss Thorne," the voice said, using my maiden name, the name I hadn't used in a decade. "My client, Mr. Sterling, is aware of your activities. He believes this petty harassment is beneath a woman of your former stature. He is prepared to make a one-time generous offer of a settlement to cease these childish games. It would be in your best interest to consider it. The lawyer. Julian Croft. Alistair's attack dog, a man who wore his ruthlessness like expensive cologne. The call was a message. He had found my sanctuary. He knew I was in New York. The game had just gotten more dangerous. Tell your client, I said, my voice calm, that the only settlement I'm interested in is watching him handcuffed and led from his office. And tell him the games are just getting started. I ended the call and immediately began wiping my digital presence from Leo's apartment. It was time to move. The stakes had been raised and the quiet digital war was about to turn physical and raw. Alistair had shown his hand. He was scared, and a scared animal is at its most dangerous and its most predictable. He would try to flush me out, to force a confrontation on his terms. I had to be ready to control the terms of the endgame. My husband emptied our joint account on our 10th anniversary. Not a slow bleed, not a series of desperate withdrawals, but a single surgical 7-figure transfer that left nothing but zeros and a digital echo of his betrayal. I found out not from a bank alert, but from the caterer who called me as I stood in my wedding gown in the middle of our empty penthouse, asking where the final payment was. The party was supposed to start in 2 hours. The guests, our friends, my colleagues, his powerful associates, were already en route. I laughed, a hollow, broken sound, and told her there had been a change of plans. Then I opened our banking app. The zeros stared back, cold and absolute. But the real knife, the one twisted with a master's precision, was the destination of the funds, an account named A. Sterling Holdings. Alistair Sterling. My husband. He hadn't just stolen from me, he had framed the theft as a business transaction, making it look like I had willingly signed over my life's work, the capital from the tech startup I'd sold 3 years prior, the money that had bought this very penthouse, the cars, the art on the walls, the money that had given him his credibility. He had taken the foundation of my identity and repurposed it as his own corporate cornerstone. An hour later, as the first guests began to arrive, confused by the dark windows and the silent stereo, a different alert chimed. A news headline pushed to my phone by a financial blog I followed. Alistair Sterling announces Sterling X Fund, securing record-breaking seed capital from visionary investor Marianne Sterling. There was a picture of him, crisp and handsome in his Brioni suit, holding a glass of champagne at a lavish launch party across town, a party I knew nothing about. My face, a smiling photoshopped ghost, was in a small inset next to the headline. The article quoted him, calling our merger of assets a natural evolution of our partnership. He had humiliated me, robbed me, and then used my own smiling image to legitimize the crime in public. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the lights of Manhattan glitter like a bed of cold diamonds, the reflection of my wedding gown a stark white smear against the dark city. The doorbell rang, insistent and oblivious. And that was the moment I knew, the real revenge begins now. The silence he left behind was a physical presence, thick and heavy in the rarefied air of the penthouse. I didn't move to answer the door. Eventually, the ringing stopped, replaced by the muffled, concerned murmurs of people on the other side of the reinforced door, then the final, defeated sound of elevator chimes taking them away. I slipped the heavy lace-trimmed gown from my shoulders, letting it pool on the cold marble floor like a discarded ghost. In its place, I pulled on worn jeans and a soft, gray cashmere sweater, the tactile comfort a small shield against the seismic shock. My mind, usually a humming engine of code and strategy, was a static-filled blank. The initial animalistic wave of panic had crested and broken, leaving behind a strange, crystalline calm. I was not a victim, I was a system that had been hacked, and my first task was to run a diagnostic to find the point of failure. It wasn't just the money. The money was a number, a quantity of light on a screen. It was the architecture of the lie. The 10 years of shared mornings, the whispered dreams in the dark, the way his hand felt on the small of my back. All of it had been a carefully constructed facade, a beautiful user interface masking a predatory algorithm. Alistair hadn't just fallen out of love, he had never been in it. I had been an asset, a means to an end, and my liquidation had been planned with the cold elegance of a corporate takeover. I poured a finger of expensive scotch, the same one we'd toasted with the night I sold my company, and walked to the window. The panoramic view of Central Park was one he loved to show off. I saw it now not as a symbol of success but as a vulnerability. He knew I would be here. He knew my patterns. He had anticipated my every move because he had helped design them. To win, I had to become unpredictable, a variable his elegant equations couldn't account for. The first step was to disappear. Not in a panicked, fleeing way, but with the quiet precision of a ghost. I had resources he didn't know about, a digital nest egg tucked away in a blind trust from a patent I'd filed before I even met him, a piece of my old life I'd kept separate, almost as a sentimental token. It was enough. I packed a single bag with nondescript clothing, my oldest laptop and a burner phone. I left the jewelry, the designer clothes, the keys to the Porsche. I wanted no tangible connection to the life he had built for me, the gilded cage. Just before dawn, with the city shifting from the deep indigo of night to the bruised purple of pre-morning, I walked out of the penthouse for the last time. I didn't take the private elevator to the garage where he would expect me to go. I took the service elevator down to the basement, moving through the labyrinth of laundry rooms and storage lockers, emerging onto a side street slick with the previous night's rain. The air smelled of wet concrete and diesel, a gritty, real smell that cleared the last of the luxurious haze from my lungs. I walked 10 blocks before hailing a cab, giving an address for a midtown hotel, then getting out and switching to the subway, a complex dance of misdirection. My destination was a place Alistair would never associate with me. A pre-war walk-up in Astoria, Queens, owned by an old college friend, Leo, who had never approved of my husband. Leo opened the door, his face shifting from sleepiness to sharp concern in an instant. He didn't ask questions, just ushered me inside the cozy, book-cluttered apartment filled with the smell of strong coffee and soldering iron. He was a forensic accountant and white-hat hacker, a wizard of the dark arts of finance and data, and he had seen the headlines. "He set you up as the visionary investor," Leo said, his voice a low gravel as he handed me a steaming mug. "It's airtight on the surface, Marianne. The transfer signatures are perfect forgeries. The press release was timed for maximum exposure and minimum immediate recourse. He's insulated himself with your own reputation. If you go public now, you'll look like a scorned wife having a psychotic break, and the financial world will eat you alive." I nodded, the plan solidifying in the cold, clear space where my heart used to be. "I know. I'm not going public. I'm going to war. But not with a lawsuit. I'm going to dismantle him. Brick by brick." Leo's eyes, behind his thick-rimmed glasses, gleamed with a familiar, righteous fire. "Where do we start?" he asked. I smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "We start with the one thing he can't fake, the one thing he never had the patience or the integrity to build. We start with his partners. Alistair's new fund, Sterling X, was built on my money, but its credibility was built on the names of his initial investors. A carefully curated list of old money dynasties and new tech billionaires who trusted his Midas touch, a touch funded by my stolen fortune.